Okay, my name's Clement Falbo. I'm a mathematician and I'm 92 years old. I taught at Sonoma State University in California for 30 years. My wife and I retired in 1999 and we volunteered to go to the Peace Corps. We had no idea where we were going to go, but they offered us Zimbabwe and we said, sure, where's that? But we went and we enjoyed as much as you can enjoy Peace Corps. It's the toughest job you'll ever love. Okay, well, since we retired and moved up here, I've learned to play golf, so that's one thing I love to do in the summer. I keep up with mathematics. I've worked on some problems that have had success with and have had them published. I had a paper published in 2021 that attacked a very long-standing problem, and it was published in the British journal Mathematical Gazette. I also had an important paper published. It was on the golden ratio, and it was a discussion that showed that many ideas that people have about the golden ratio are erroneous, and it got a lot of attention, and people keep reading it. I've had a report of something like 9,000 reads on that, so that was something significant for me. As a young child, I guided towards going into medicine. My mother and father wanted me to go in and become a medical doctor. And when I joined the Navy in 1951 during the Korean War, I actually did work in the hospital corps. The Navy has a hospital corps. They're called the medics, and I was in that for 4 years, but I wasn't really very happy about going into medicine. So when I came back and went to the University of Texas, I took a test. It was called an interest inventory test. I didn't realize what I wanted to do because I was so interested in so many things, but when I went in to see the report on it, the person said, "You want to be a math teacher." Well, I had never thought of that, but it sounded right for me, and so I started taking all the math classes I could. When I got into the math courses, of course, I ran into many different students in the different classes, so we really had a lot of contact with each other than just a classroom. And so we had a lot of gatherings. Most of us were student assistants, and so we earned some money that way, and we had what they called office hours, and that was I would sit in the room and some students, no matter what, from physics or mathematics and from courses that I've had, that they had taken courses and had problems in those, and they came in with problems from courses that I had never had. And so I would read the textbook with them and try to find how to approach the problem, and that made me really love teaching, because I was teaching people stuff that I didn't even know anything about. And it was fun. Of course, I learned it that way too. And my first wife was a nurse at the hospital in Austin, Texas. And so she and the GI Bill that I had were enough to cover us, so we never incurred a student loan. Okay, well, after my first wife died, then I met Jean, whom I fell in love with and married, but she had a condition that she wanted to go to the Peace Corps, so if I wanted to be with her, then I was going to have to go to the Peace Corps. So we signed up. I was 60, maybe a little bit older, and we were the oldest people who applied for Peace Corps. We didn't know if we were going to get it, but we did, and they said, we didn't know where we were going to go, and they said, well, how would you like to go to Zimbabwe? And we said, sure, where's that? And we didn't, so we did know where it was, but we looked it up, and we did actually go in 1999. The next year, actually, we were there in the Y2K, year 2000. And we loved doing the things. I was teaching math and Jean was teaching science, biology mainly. So that was our Peace Corps experience. And then when we got back, I taught another class at Sonoma State, and then Jean and I retired to Joseph, Oregon. When I taught either students in classes and material that I didn't know, or taught students in classes that I did know, I always loved writing up material to present it in the way that the students could follow it. And so I realized that I had a knack for being able to explain hard stuff to people and make it easier enough for them to learn it. And so I actually wrote many times. The only notes I ever used in a class were notes that I wrote myself and that were not published textbooks. But after a while, some of the booksellers would come around and they would say, okay, what are you using in this class? And I'd say, well, I'm using my notes. And so they would say, okay, how about writing your notes up and sending it to us? And so I did that, and I got a couple of books published out of that from the classes that I was teaching at Sonoma State. Actually, when I took calculus, I was about 4 years older than most of the other students taking it, because I had 4 years in the Navy, and most people came straight out of high school and took the calculus. And I was taking it from a man who was a pioneer in teaching mathematics by having students learn by solving problems rather than hearing lectures. But the thing is, you had to be brave enough, the students had to be brave enough to raise their hand and volunteer to cover that problem that day and become essentially the teacher for that class. And most of the students were not, they were a little bit hesitant about it, but there was nothing to stop me from getting up there and doing that. And even if I got shot down, it didn't matter. I learned something anyway, and the class learned something. And so that class I recognized was a way to teach, because I saw that everybody in the class, not just me, learned a lot more because they were teaching, basically. And you can learn when you teach. That's a true tenet. And so anyway, so I took notes carefully, because I thought, this is the way you got to do it. And I kept those notes for years. I kept them for, what it was, 20 years. No, I feel I was more confident in that class because I was in the Navy. And so that's one thing I had on all the other kids, that they had some fears of something. And after going through the Navy, there's nothing that could scare you in a high school or in a college class. It was not called inquiry-based. It was called the Texas method, or the Moore method, because it was named after the teacher, R.L. Moore, who was teaching it. And his name has fallen out of favor because he was bigoted. He really screened out black and dark-skinned people. But he was born in 1889, so, he had a little bit of a excuse for it, and he was actually named after Robert E. Lee. That was his. So I never really disliked him, but I didn't want to be associated with him. The first calculus book I wrote did have his name in it, but since then I've had it redone and just call it the Texas method, or the inquiry-based learning method, because that's what people were using. They were calling it that. I think almost every calculus class now is being taught somewhat like that. In fact, they have a name for it, not only inquiry-based learning, but they have it called active calculus. And what they do is present students with problems. They do have some textbooks, and they do have some lectures from the teacher and so on, but they've tried to put as much as they could on having students present stuff in class and having students answer questions in class, and not just be passive. They're having students be active. If you were trying to teach a person how to play basketball, you wouldn't have them all sit in a room and lecture to them about basketball and then just send them home, or you wouldn't try to do anything, any kind of sport or activities, physical activity like that. You really have to get people involved to do the thing, and then they will learn it. And that's also true about language and art and so on. I would not imagine anybody teaching people how to draw things by just lecturing to them about it. So it's really a part of what is the best kind of pedagogy for teaching. You are having people develop their own solutions to problems, and they take more time to do it. I mean, a person who knows the subject would get up there and quickly dispatch of the problems, and the students would try to follow as much as they could, but it would go faster and you'd be able to cover more material. So in a way, IBL slows things down, and a lot of times a person will take a class and not get as many topics as a person who took a regular lecture class. If you spend time and work hard at it, it is true that you have to work hard at mathematics in order to learn, because you have to keep plugging away at a particular idea that seems to be elusive and so on. And I've worked with students who are learning disabled, and I've actually created a course for them. It was called Math Odyssey, and that was actually one of the books that I wrote. I've had good success with them. It took a lot of help. I had to get the university to give me student helpers to help those students, to give them extra time on exams, and to have them come into the office and try to explain things to me, and then try to see what they could do. I had to use. I understood that if you used a different color paper other than white, like if you used blue paper, the students wouldn't have a flashing black and white page that they were trying to read, and some of them that had dyslexia. And the reason I needed to do that was because California had a requirement of students, that students had to get what they called numeracy, or in other words, number knowledge. And we were trying to teach them trig or basic algebra and half a dozen other things that didn't really make any sense, because they weren't going to be any better at those. So I developed this class, and part of that actually got into my math milestones, because I was trying to bring an enrichment more like the classic, I would say liberal arts type of math to the students, because I knew they were having trouble with a crunch, number crunching class. And so, but I think people can learn math better than they think they can, and they just don't realize how much hard work it takes. But I think people can learn more geometry and more number theory than they think, because they just don't. They just give up. One of the hard topics in modern mathematics is algebra, but I'm talking about abstract algebra. But if you look at it very carefully and take every definition and every derivation, it's pretty simple, and it actually is it's not deep. It's pretty simple and follows the definitions pretty well. But people give up on it. Abstract algebra is a big, scary bugaboo to students who are trying to learn math, but they can do it. I never had people tell me it was boring. They just told me it was too hard for them or something. And maybe it is boring in the way that some people teach it. I remember when one of my sons was doing really well in elementary school, and instead of giving him something more challenging, they just gave him more of the same problems. Like if they say, okay, add up this page of number addition problems, get them right away. Well, here's another page of the same addition problems, slightly different. And that was a lack on the part of the teacher to find some way to make it more interesting. And I think only people who really don't have trouble with it think it's boring. And that's because they haven't been challenged. But I actually do keep working on math. I'm solving some problems now that I want to put together into a paper. So far I've written, since I retired, I've written several papers that have been accepted in journals, and in fact there's one paper that was accepted in the Mathematical Association of America published a book of Martin Gardner's works. They collected works that were either his or stuff related to the stuff he was doing, and it was called Martin Gardner in the 21st century, whatever century we're in now, the 21st century. And they took one of the papers that I had published on the golden ratio and put it in there as one of the different kinds of chapters that he had for that book. So to me, that was a good honor for me. And it was called Who Can Learn Mathematics? And I have, this is an interesting thing I can tell that was in the article. I have taught mathematics to African children in both rural and urban Zimbabwe, because we taught in the rural schools first, and then the Peace Corps moved us to the urban school. And I taught college credit mathematics classes at Walawa High School down the road here, and in city schools in Zimbabwe. I was asked, can those pupils in our rural districts learn mathematics? They were talking about the Walawa High School. Then, I'm sorry, that was the African people asking, could the African rural students learn mathematics? Then back in the USA, I was asked, can those African kids learn mathematics? And then in Walawa, I've heard people ask me, well, could those kids, rural kids that you're teaching here from Walawa County learn mathematics? And then sometime during my whole life, I've had questions, people saying, can girls learn mathematics? And that was really annoying. So I said, yes, 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 and yes. Because people have some kind of screwy idea that people that they don't know, or people just can't learn mathematics. And I'm getting on my high horse and saying, I want the society to abandon its ignorance about the ability of human beings everywhere to learn mathematics.